Yo, for the last month, I've been playing with the new Steam Deck OLED and it is damn near perfect. Coming from the ROG Ally, there is a performance downgrade, but in every other area, I believe the Steam Deck is the superior handheld. I'm a big fan of building custom PCs, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to a handheld, I'm definitely a guy who just wants to knock out my backlog with very little configuration out of the box. The deck makes it very easy, but doesn't force you to play around with all the different settings it has. This is what I think makes it such a great choice. So the deck runs on SteamOS. Being Linux based, it does bring its own host of problems, but ultimately it's been a reason why I like the device so much. SteamOS is very minimal and user friendly, which makes navigating throughout the deck, loading up games, etc. all feel so fluid. Unlike Windows, this is a proper touch-based OS that also works well when using the controller buttons. If you need to change a simple setting, it's not as annoying when on the Ally. I think that device running on Windows has serious drawbacks, but in terms of game and app compatibility, it is a different story. On the deck, trying to install something like the GTA Definitive Editions through a third-party launcher is a huge pain in the ass. This seemed simple at first, but to actually find the download, you have to go through the virtual file structure, which requires you to pick random folders until you get the right one. Additionally, there's a lot of games that simply won't run on the deck, like Modern Warfare 3, as the anti-cheat doesn't work on Linux. This really doesn't bother me though, because the way I see this device is something that I use to smash out my backlog, which is mostly lighter indie games. Even if you're primarily playing AAA games, you're still gonna have a great experience on here. In every one that I tried, I was getting a solid 40 FPS. Though if you really want good performance on the go, the Ally is going to be much better suited. Its Z1 Extreme processor is a lot more impressive, the downside just being its very poor battery life. Now, the design of the deck is mostly unchanged from the OG, but I think it's really good. The plastic build does give it a cheaper feeling, and after I had opened this thing up to swap the SSD, I scratched it a little bit, which has caused a small amount of creaking. That aside, I do find it to be incredibly comfortable. The Ally has this very flat feeling shape that, with the macro buttons right along the handles, makes it kind of awkward to hold on to. The deck actually feels like it's wrapping around my hands, and resting my fingers on the triggers feels much nicer. It now weighs 640 grams, a small decrease from the weight of the original. He's still very much a chunky boy. Now, I didn't expect to like the trackpads as much as I have, but after using these, I can't believe Asus didn't create their own version. When you're on the desktop or even in-game, it makes selecting something so much easier. I have had some issues while scrolling though, mainly being it reverses the direction while I drag. The haptic feedback is what I love most about them though. Valve managed to make it feel incredibly good. The haptics of the deck itself though aren't anything crazy. These joysticks have been slightly improved from the original. This is just a change to increase the grip and improve the reliability, but they feel very good to rest my fingers on. Though they do still feel a lot worse than a proper controller. I don't really know what it is, but playing any sort of FPS game on here just feels wonky. Moving on to the display, which is by far the most significant upgrade. Having an OLED screen on here is simply fantastic. It really looks incredible. The colors are vibrant and the screen is a whole 200 nits brighter at its max. It also can now support HDR, which brings it to a whopping 1000 nits of brightness. I tried this out in Cyberpunk and it just looks gorgeous. There's not a lot of PC games that support it, but when available, I do recommend you take advantage of it. Now, the resolution here is still 1200 by 800p, which at first was a noticeable downgrade. This lasted for the first few days, but after that, as expected, I got used to it. 1080p looks great, but on a 7-inch screen, the small improvement in visual clarity just isn't worth the performance trade-off. The display also got a refresh rate bump from 60 to 90 Hz, which is a great quality of life improvement, though practically any game you'd actually care about this bump in isn't hitting this frame rate anyways. The benefit that OLED brings though in terms of responsiveness is a massive decrease in input lag. So while your games might not be running at crazy high frame rates, that input lag decrease can make them feel smoother. Something I didn't realize at first was the deck actually doesn't support VRR, but in nearly every game I've played, the frame rate stays incredibly consistent. If you take a look at any benchmarks comparing the OLED and LCD versions, the performance improvement itself is minimal, something like 1 to 3 FPS, but those frame rates are more consistent on the OLED model. This has to do with the more efficient chip that has a 6nm processor. The battery has also been improved, which fixes a big issue the original deck had. It went from 40 watt-hours to 60 watt-hours, which translates to about 30 to 50% longer battery life depending on the game. In my experience, in some late indies, I was getting 4 to 5 hours, whereas for AAA and heavier games, I was getting slightly above 2 hours. Both Cyberpunk and Red Dead Redemption 2 gave me just about 2 hours 15 minutes, and God of War had me sitting around an hour hour and 50 minutes. I bought a power bank from Anchor to go with my Ally as its battery life was so bad. With the deck, I don't think it's as necessary. If you're going to be on the go with this and have more than 4 hours to play, I would recommend getting one. This bank has been giving me roughly a charge and a half, so figure in the most battery draining games, you'll be getting close to 5 hours of gameplay. Another improvement with this deck is a 16% increase in memory bandwidth. This is also partially a reason that we've seen that minor uptick in performance. Something far more tangible though is the improved cooling. After 30 minutes of Cyberpunk, the Ally was significantly warmer, but also did worse at keeping the heat away from your hands. The inclusion of Wi-Fi 6E is one of the things I really noticed while testing. I was downloading whole 60GB games in 10 minutes, being able to take advantage of my pretty fast internet at home. Also, with the new Bluetooth chip, the deck now supports Bluetooth mics, which is a lifesaver if you'll be playing with friends. I've actually been playing quite a bit just by plugging my headphones into the audio jack, and they sound super good. The built-in speakers are okay, but they only get so loud and have a muddier tone to them.
Oh shit.
So there are two storage options with the Steam Deck OLED, 512GB and 1TB. Now, I by far recommend you grab a 1TB SSD, as having the extra storage space is incredibly convenient, but what you should do is get a 512GB deck and then grab a 1TB SSD to swap it out with. The reason for this is you can save a little bit of money, but more importantly, the anti-glare screen on the 1TB model isn't glossy like most OLED screens are, so while it is a minor difference, what I've read is that it can make those inky blacks a little more gray. I wanted to have it look the best, and I mostly play indoors anyway. I bought this 1TB drive from Corsair for about $80 to throw in the deck. Prying off the back casing to actually get to the M2 drive was a pain, so I highly recommend you pick up some tools. Otherwise, the swap was relatively simple. You just need to reinstall a SteamOS image onto an external USB stick and then plug it into the deck. After that's all said and done, you're left with about 916GB of free space. Now, gaming performance. As I mentioned, comparing the original Steam Deck to this one, the increase in performance is negligible, but you do see more consistent frame rates across games. For heavier AAA games, you can expect to be sitting somewhere between 30 to 40 FPS when on low to medium settings. In AA or just more heavy indie games, you're likely to be at about 50 or just under 60. It's with those remaining indies and older games where you're consistently going to see games surpassing 60. This is where the majority of my backlog sits. Most every game that I threw at the deck ran incredibly well. There was a few I tried that by default were locked at 30, so just make sure you double check that. Red Dead Redemption 2 with textures set to ultra and a mix of low and medium settings gave me an average of 48 FPS. Cyberpunk with the medium preset enabled gave me an average of 44 FPS. There were significant variations in the benchmarking tool, but in my gameplay, most areas of the game were sitting in the low to mid 40s. Rarely was I seeing any frame drops. Hogwarts Legacy at low settings had by far the most inconsistent gameplay. Busier areas you'll see drops to the low 40s, but then have close to 55 in quieter parts. God of War at low settings hovered between 40 and 50 FPS. Again, this was one that jumped around a bit, but it never felt choppy. It's so easy to get wrapped up in the frames you're getting, but having been playing with the deck over the last month and really heavily this past week, at 40 FPS, it's incredibly playable. I've been having a ton of fun with Cyberpunk and have barely noticed that it's below 60. So this is the Steam Deck OLED. Personally, I don't have a ton of time to play games, so having a device like this makes it so much easier to make progress on my backlog. I'm planning to travel more in the future, and I can easily say that the Steam Deck will be coming along with me each time. All that said, this isn't quite a Steam Deck 2. It's a great refinement, but I don't think it's significant enough that many original deck users should feel the need to upgrade. Though, if you've been in the market for a deck but were a little deterred by the battery life or screen, now's a great time to jump in. Let me know if there's anything I missed and what you want me to cover next week, as I'll be comparing the Steam Deck with the ROG Ally. Appreciate you guys for watching. I'll see you then. Take care.